My name is Andre Henry. I'm the director of Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperatives Studies. And this afternoon, we're very honored to have a distinguished panel. The panel is made up of the Honourable Colin E, Minister of Labor and Social Partner Relations of Barbados. Minister Jordan has proved himself to be a true friend of Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, as well as a dedicated Caribbean patriot. This afternoon, our focus is on the role of social dialogue as one of the key tools for us to address the challenges that present themselves as a result, not just of COVID-19, but of all the disruptions and unforeseen circumstances that is part of the existence of the Caribbean and indeed of the world. So without further ado, because we really want to hear from Minister Jordan, and then we will hear from Senator Humphrey when he joins us. Senator Humphrey sends his apologies. He is winding up a planning meeting on the post-COVID response. And that's one of the things we realized that we have to double. I was just sharing with my good friend, Minister Jordan, his schedule for the last week. And I am happy that as an older person, I don't have to carry out those kinds of responsibilities. I don't know how I would have done it. God bless you and God speed to you, my brother. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Minister Jordan to share with us his perspective on the role of social dialogue.
Thank you very much, Dr. Henry. It is good to be with the Cipriani College. I mean, everything nowadays is virtual, but I'm happy. My association with Cipriani College, I like that association, and I want to congratulate you on the work that you're doing yourself and the college in terms of raising the awareness of Caribbean people to some of the issues that affect workers, and issues that affect workers affect countries. So congratulations on that. When we talk about social dialogue, I like the topic. You're talking about facing uncertainty. And in today's world, there is an uncertainty that many of us have not experienced in our lifetimes. And it has to do with the fact that it relates to health. And so that matter itself makes people uncertain, makes people fearful. And then, given that we are small islands operating in a global space with limited resources and hoping not to be overwhelmed, the fear becomes real, the uncertainty becomes real. And so the matter of social dialogue is, in fact, imperative. I listened to one of the webinars in this series, well, not in this series, in the webinars that you've had over a number of weeks, where you've been making statements and putting them using definite language, not asking questions. And I agree that this topic is well put to be a definite statement. That is to say, speaking to social dialogue as an imperative rather than asking a question. And I want to say a few things within that context, the imperative of social dialogue. Now, in Barbados, we've had the social partnership. We call it the social partnership, the tripartite, workers, businesses, and government. That was established in the 1991 to 92 period, a very difficult and challenging period for Barbados. It was a time of recession, or foreign exchange reserves were very low. We were already at the brink of disaster, and the government of the day recognized that the only way out was to bring business and workers to the table with government to craft a strategy that would save the country. And At that time, we also spoke about saving the value of our currency. And it worked. And since then, we have been, and I think this goes back now to Dr. Henry when they first knew of you. I mentioned to you that at that time, many years ago, at a Promalco conference in Jamaica, but what I remember about that was people from across the Caribbean, colleagues, who were asking us from Barbados about this social partnership thing. How, what about it? How did it help you? How did it stop you from going over the edge, from going over the precipice? And we've recognized the value of it. So, I mean, it now has currency. Almost 30 years ago, the social partnership saved the country. This government that I'm a part of came into office at the end of May 2018, and we were sworn in. Election was a Thursday. We got the results early Friday morning. We were sworn in on Sunday afternoon. And on Monday morning, 10 o'clock, our first official meeting was with the social partnership. Because we recognize, again, we were in a difficult situation. And if we were to make it out of that difficult situation, all hands needed to be on deck. And the social partnership needed to be fully a part of the conversation, a part of the deliberation, a part of the decision making. And that is how we handled that period on coming into office, facing a very difficult situation, limited foreign reserves again, high debt to GDP ratio, many downgrades, over 20 downgrades in the preceding 4 to 5 years. So we came into office in a difficult situation, but we recognized that we could get out of a difficult situation if we engage the social partnership, if we put social dialogue up front on the agenda. And that is what we did. So we did something that was pretty historic. And just giving this background, because I think the background is useful to where we are now dealing with the COVID-19 situation. For us, that was also a time of uncertainty because many downgrades ran out of foreign reserves. That would normally have meant that the next step would have been a devaluation of the currency and significant economic disruption. The social partnership, we came together, we engaged in full, frank discussion, and we were able to do something that we've been told is historic, and that is within 4 months, we were able to have an agreement with the International Monetary Fund on an agreement that would help to stabilize the country and to give credence to the plans that we had put to them that they had endorsed. Now, part of that, and this is where the social dialogue comes into play. There were a couple of things that I want to mention. One is that we decided to default on a debt payment. And we took that decision as a country, not as a government. We took it as a country. So when the Prime Minister announced that we would be defaulting on our debt, and that is not a very easy decision to take. It affects how other countries see you. But when we made that announcement, the Prime Minister made that announcement with all of the social partners around her so that it was clear to the world that the country was at one on this very unusual, maybe drastic position that we had taken. And what that did, almost simultaneous with that announcement of a default, was an announcement by the IMF director at the time that the IMF supported Barbados and supported the route that we had taken. And I think it spoke that confidence that Madame Lagarde at the time, as the head of the IMF, the confidence that she placed in the decision, even though it was a decision that really is not one that a country ever wants to take. I think her coming out to do that was a reflection of understanding that the country had made this decision, that the decision was a result of social dialogue. And out of the dialogue came a decision that everybody had bought into. Now, that kind of relationship with the social partnership has continued. The review committee with the IMF program, we call it the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Program, the committee that reviews Barbados's progress is a committee made up of workers and business. The government gives information, they make the assessment as to if we are on track with what we have agreed in our program and the IMF's agreement and their facilitation of that program. While we're in the process of rebuilding the economy, along comes the novel coronavirus, COVID-19. And while it is a terrible, disruptive, and deadly pandemic, it is almost as if what we've done over the year and a half to 2 years before, prepared us for this. So I am careful, maybe not to use the word providential, even though people of faith may see it as providential, that we had built such a strong partnership over the preceding year and a half that coming into the pandemic and all the disruption that it brought, we just continued the process of consultation and social dialogue. And I think that has really helped us as it relates to the response of the country and our ability, even in a tough economic situation preceding the pandemic, to keep our heads above the water during the pandemic and as we move now toward the reopening the full reopening of the country. Right through the pandemic period up to this point, we've had continuing dialogue with the partners. They've been involved before we locked down. While in lockdown, we've had frequent Zoom meetings with the partners. We've had our most recent meeting just 2 days ago, on Monday afternoon. The country, we want as a government, we believe, we understand that we have to reopen. We've been hearing that from the partners over the past few weeks. And we had a meeting on Monday to talk through some details of what that reopening, in terms of reopening the borders, what that will look like. Our Prime Minister would have said to an interviewer from BBC just a couple of weeks ago, we're not interested in setting dates for reopening. We need to be sure that all partners are comfortable and feel ready for the reopening. And once we get to that point, we can reopen. And 2 days ago, the partners were at one to say, yes, we have to reopen. And all that is really left to be done is to finalize the protocols, and they're almost done. And those protocols are also the result of the social dialogue. Those, once they are in place, then we're ready to go. The conversations are already happening with the airlines. But I say all of that to say that here, the process in Barbados is a smooth one, relatively, because there has been and continues to be that dialogue with our partners. Now, in the last meeting on Monday, we also included members of civil society. And that is an area, and we like to be frank here, that is an area of one that we moved a bit too slowly on, including civil society in that social dialogue. We had used the traditional tripartite approach to dialogue, but in Monday's meeting, because our thinking is evolving and we came to the conclusion we have to include, as we look to reopen the borders of the country, we have to bring civil society more fully to the table. And so civil society was represented at that meeting on Monday, and they gave full input as we spoke to the matter of reopening the borders, which would represent the full reopening of the country. Because as it stands now, all businesses, all organizations have reopened. The only curfew hours we have are on weekends between 10 and 5, 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And that is just to make sure that we don't go too wild in terms of getting involved in activities, mass activities that could contribute to a resurgence of the virus. The social partners have been involved. Social dialogue is alive and well and strong in the country.
As you expand, traditionally, in the case of as you pointed out, in Barbados, you've gone the way of the tripartite social dialogue.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate, or what are the challenges you see to going tripartite plus as the need arises to engage a broader cross section of the country in the process?
We don't necessarily see a difficulty. What we've done on coming to office was to establish a social justice committee where civil society, as well as business and workers' organizations, are represented. What we've found, though, is that because the social partnership is so much a part of the fabric of our country, the social partnership is still seen by the country as that body that deals with major issues. So while there is theoretically parity between the social partnership and the social justice committee, there is, in fact, the social partnership is still seen as that body that we turn to for consultation on the major matters that affect the country.
So the social partnership could be seen as the apex body of which the social justice committee is a subset?
But that is not what we didn't want to go in that direction.
Okay.
We wanted two bodies, and we have two bodies established. There is a dotted line between social justice committee and the social partnership, but we wanted, they will not necessarily discuss the same issues, and we wanted them to be seen both as, in their own rights, serious organizations that address maybe slightly different areas of the country's development. But the pandemic and the response to the pandemic told us that we had to include civil society very early on in what we almost default in Barbados to social partnership.
Okay.
So when we're going to be discussing these matters, we go to, okay, let's speak to the social partnership. Let us bring the partners together so we can discuss this and thrash it out. It means that while we build the currency of the Social Justice Committee, we need to make sure that civil society is involved at the level of the partnership. So before we close down, we would have had a large social partnership meeting, and we included faith-based organizations, we included cooperatives, but the credit union is already a part of the social partnership. We added the credit unions in 2019. They were not part of the social partnership before in their own right, but they are now fully a part of the social partnership. But in the meetings we had before the shutdown, meetings that related to the COVID-19 pandemic as it was unfolding, did include members of civil society, but particularly faith-based organizations. They were included, and cooperatives were also included. Cooperatives that included vendors and other taxi co-ops and that kind of thing.
I'd like to delve a little more deeply into some critical points in the social partnership, the Barbados experience. So we're looking now at virtually 30 years.
Yes, 29 years.
29 years.
Yeah.
What would you identify as the key factors that have caused the longevity of this experience? Many countries in the region, I know in Trinidad and Tobago, we've had several attempts at putting together some kind of social partnership, and it hasn't really worked as we would like. But you've had at least 4 changes of government since the social partnership was
Social partnership, and then we had a change in '94. We had a change in 2008, and we had a change in 2018.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, if you can, what would you identify as the key factors that have led to the longevity and the vibrance of the social partner, of the social partnership?
I think maybe the first key factor is that the leadership at both the business level and the workers level bought in fully to the partnership. They bought in, so that there was a period of time when there was a little bit of a lull. But in that period when there was a bit of a lull, which is maybe the 5-6 years before we came into office again in 2018, in that period, business and workers continued to push for more frequent meetings. Now, I said a lull because it didn't disappear. Mm-hmm. But there were still meetings, but it wasn't those meetings weren't as frequent, and the partnership wasn't as vibrant as it had been previously. But leadership and leadership in the trade union movement and in the business sector is not the same leadership as was there when it was established. Mm-hmm. But that understanding of the importance has been transferred to succeeding leadership, to the leadership that now sits at the table. So that buy-in from the very top has been important. And I think beyond that, I think the public at large still remembers what it did in terms of saving the country in the 1991-92 period. I think that is still part of the country's memory.
Yes.
And the country has been very, very clear over time that there's certain directions that we don't want to go in. And one of those is devaluation. And the country is of the view that the social partnership is what saved us in 91-92. And given that it did it at that point, I think everybody is comfortable. So it's become part of I mentioned, I think, fabric. It's become part of the country, part of the governance system. So when there's a lull, people will ask questions. So what's happening? Where are we meeting? It's become part of the fabric.
I just want our viewers to know that you can type in your questions and they will be fed to us so that Minister could address those questions. So what I am gathering, one of the takeaways I think I'm getting, Minister, is that there is a fundamental social consensus, and you've identified the desire that the Barbadian dollar should not be devalued.
Yes.
I'll be interested to know, because for a country to develop a social consensus, the message behind the consensus has to be communicated. People have to understand what's in it for them.
Yeah.
Is this just is this conveyed as a question of national pride, or is it conveyed as something that has an additional practical benefit to the people of Barbados? And how is this communicated to the population?
I think it is both the fact of national pride as well as a real benefit. I think the matter of communication may have happened not necessarily deliberately from government. Barbadians would have looked around the region and looked around the world. And it is difficult to find a Barbadian who is convinced that devaluation is an option. So that in 1991, Barbadians were prepared to take a pay cut rather than go the route of devaluation. Okay. In succeeding periods of time, including in 2018, when we came into office, Barbadians were prepared and preferred that there were job losses rather than a devaluation. And I cannot say to you that there's been any educating of the public about the pros and cons of a devaluation. Let me take some water. Yeah. I can't say that there's been any deliberate education on it, but I think that as Barbadians have looked around, they have not seen any benefits. They've seen what they consider, or what we consider, to be hardship, and not just hardship, but hardship that takes quite a while to come out of. Yes. So whenever an IMF, whether or not we're in a program, the IMF will come and do their Article 4 consultations, and I've had reason to be part of those conversations when I was leading the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association in a previous life. The officers or the officials from the IMF always said that whether it is the taxi driver from the airport, whether it is the room attendant in the hotel, whether it is the central bank governor, regardless of who they speak to, everybody, once people identify them as being from the IMF, the almost immediate response to them, because there used to be a time when people felt the IMF's prescription was devaluation.
Yes.
So I've heard a number of the people who have been in part of these delegations say that once people know they're from the IMF, they come up to them and say to them, we're not doing devaluation. So I think it's been looking around and seeing what has happened. And then from that maybe comes a sense of pride. We don't want to go there.
Yes.
We don't want to see our standard of living drop to that extent. So we're prepared to take drastic action and to endure drastic action once it is not that.
Okay.
So I think that's what I said. I think they're maybe it is both.
We have a multiple part question, Minister, okay. with some easier parts than others from Mr. Cyrus Griffith, the Labour Commissioner from Grenada, and I will take each. I will do the different parts and let you respond to them because they're addressed separately. Mr. Griffith says, it seems as though employers have gotten the upper hand in these times. What advice or guidance would you give them with regard to negotiating wages and job security for workers?
That is difficult because the environment is difficult.
Yes.
And I had cause to say just last night, actually, while we were in Parliament, to say to the Parliament and to the country that I didn't use the term because I didn't know if you had copyrighted it. So I didn't use the term that workers' rights are not quarantined.
That's community property.
Okay. But what I did say was that all the laws that were on the books before the Public Health Emergency Act came into force are still on the books. We also made that very clear whenever we have our social partnership meetings. And we've been having those pretty frequently, so we've been able to send the message. Now, that is not to say that there are not situations where we suspect some may want to take advantage of the situation. And we actually became aware of a kind of maybe a situation that could have been brewing. And the Prime Minister spoke to it not directly, but directly enough at the social partnership meeting 2 days ago that I think those involved got the message. So that what has to happen is that, and another thing our Prime Minister said at a social partnership meeting, this is about maybe 2 ago, so probably about 2 weeks ago, she said, she reinforced to the entire meeting that the government is a Labour Party government. This is a Labour Party government. This is the party that I'm a part of. So I'm saying we're using the weight of government to help in that messaging that this is not the time that we're going to allow for the floating of rights. She made it clear we're a Labour Party government. The major trade union in Barbados was birthed out of this party. Yes. I mean, they're separate entities now, but we've always supported the cause of workers, right? We understand, though, that as a government we have to, and I think our founder, the Right to Excellence, Sir Grant Adams, who was Premier of the Federation for that short time that it existed, was quite clear because he founded the party, then he founded the union, but as two separate bodies, recognizing that sometimes government has to govern, and the union may not accept. So he was head of the union and head of the government, and sometimes he would act, well, head of the party, I should say. Sometimes he would act as head of the party, and other things act as head of the trade union. So we've been using making it very clear that this government will not be tolerating the abrogation of the rights of workers. We've made that very, very clear. No laws are coming off the books. We had to reinforce, for example, because in our Employment Rights Act, we have a provision where there is to be 6 weeks to negotiate and to discuss and to consult on layoffs of significant numbers. And the pandemic, as would be the case if there were a hurricane, does not give you or did not give us that amount of time.
Yes.
We had to remind our employers that the Act allows, even though you cannot engage in the full consultation, that the consultation has to be, at least be with the Chief Labor Officer. So those things have to be reinforced. Now, the reason why we go the route of reinforcing as opposed to shouting at is because the Prime Minister says this all the time. We operate as family. Mm-hmm. So we will disagree from time to time because even close siblings disagree. But we also have to talk straight, as we would say in Barbados, when we have to do that. And we have been doing that in this situation. We've been keeping that discussion on the table so that all parties understand that we are not going to be allowing for the floating of the rights of workers, while recognizing that this kind of environment is really fertile ground for worker exploitation. So we've been talking, sorry?
So that leads to this, the second part of Mr. Griffith's question. Has the pandemic weakened, in your opinion, has the pandemic weakened unions? And unions able to survive the pandemic and its after effects?
I think the pandemic has weakened the entire country in different ways. Government is weakened because our fiscal position has been weakened. Weakened because we have to do a couple of things. We have to keep the social safety net going. We also have to spend extra in building out healthcare facilities. Businesses have been weakened, and I'm deliberately leaving the workers' unions to last. Businesses have been weakened because, for example, for our tourism sector, Grenada's tourism sector, I mean, the sector has come to a standstill, in essence. So there are businesses that are kind of operating on the edge, but not really operating, but tottering on the edge. And then because of the mass layoffs, the spending in other sectors is not the same.
Yes.
So businesses have also been weakened, and many of them are in difficult situations, both large and small. Smaller businesses have been in situations, and we have a sizable informal sector who don't fall under the social security system because they haven't been contributing, and we are doing an education program to get them to contribute. But so businesses large and small have been weakened as well. Unions have been weakened. A laid off worker or a worker who has lost a job is not able to contribute dues. So from a financial perspective, they're weakened. But I think we all know that in the labor market, in any market, but in the labor market as well, when there is excess supply, then it becomes a buyer's market. And what we are doing, recognizing, and this is where government has to play the governing role, recognizing that there will be weakness in the labor market. There is no an excessive supply of labor. I don't really like using that, but there are more workers than there are jobs at the moment. And that will put its own pressure on wages, terms and conditions, all other terms and conditions. And government then has a responsibility to make sure that this is not a matter of excess orange juice supply versus demand for orange juice, because where workers are concerned, we're talking about human beings. So we are not going to be allowing the market forces to determine equilibrium where workers are concerned. So the labor market will not operate on that basis. And that is where government then steps in to make sure that workers are treated as human beings and are not exploited in this kind of a situation.
I have a two-part question from Mr. Imo Bakari from Trinidad and Tobago. And he asks first, who and what circumstances birthed the idea of social partnership in Barbados? And what would you deem to be the significant achievements of social partnership to date? And how far is your government prepared to carry it in the governance of Barbados?
Let me start at the beginning. I want to start with the last one, but let me start at the beginning. Matter of fact, no, let's start at the last one. How far is government prepared to go? I'm going to start with that because there is an illustration that really hit me between the eyes in terms of where our Prime Minister saw this. We were going through the protocols, and this is before pandemic came in our preparation. There were different stages, stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. In one of those stages, either 2 or 3, there was a proposal to sequester cabinet, because if there was going to be mass deaths and that kind of thing, I mean, you have to make sure that government can still function. When the Prime Minister saw it, she said to us, and we were in cabinet at the time, who can the cabinet manage a country on its own? She said, if we're going to be going in this direction, then the entire leadership of the country has to be protected. So that in our view, the leadership of the country does not rest only with the government.
Mhm.
Now, government is ultimately leader in the country, but we see to a significant degree leadership as a family or a team effort. And that is the reason why we don't do anything major without serious consultation. Not just, we don't call people together and just inform them. Serious consultation with the social partners. Now, the partnership, I started to hint to that earlier when we started the webinar. In 1991, Barbados was in a precarious economic situation. We were down to, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks of import cover, and government was running out of money to pay its bills. And I think the government of the day had a number of ideas as to what should be done. Government went to the International Monetary Fund, and the impression I've gotten is that the medicine that was prescribed was a little bit, let me put it a different way, a more modern way. The side effects were as long and as dangerous as the ones we see advertised on television. And many of those side effects, the last one mentioned is death. And I think government saw these side effects as being as potent as that. And I think then, running out of options, it was felt, let us sit down together, let's bring everybody to the table and see what we can come up with. And so that is really the birth of the partnership. The leaders of the trade union movement and the leadership of the business sector, those leaders were brought together and the cards were put on the table. This is where we are. This is where we find ourselves. This is the medicine that has been prescribed. That medicine, I think the reaction from business and workers organizations was that we can't handle it either. That is, the side effects are too terrible. So they sat and worked out an alternative to propose to the IMF. And that really was the birth, in simple terms, of the social partnership. Out of a dire situation, literally looking down the barrel of the gun. Nowhere to turn. This is from government's perspective, nowhere to turn. We know the situation. The only place to turn is the IMF, but what the IMF is giving to us is not anything that we can handle.
Was this information, because what I'm hearing was the need for clear and open sharing of information,
yes,
on the part of government. So was it that the public already have this information, or when government called the social partners in, that the government basically opened the books and said, this is a true picture of what is taking place? And how important is that transparent sharing of information for a good social dialogue process?
I'm not sure the information was widely known. It was out there though, because there had been an election in 1991 as well, before the formation of the social partnership. And the party that was in opposition at the time did say to the country that we are close to the edge. Mm-hmm. Now, politics as it is, so enough people believe that we weren't. So the opposition pushing that message did not hold sway, and the party that was in office at the time won that election. But almost immediately after, then the approach was made to the IMF. Now, when the parties sat down, everything was put on the table, because everything had been put on the table for the IMF. And in order to convince the partners of the seriousness of the situation, the information would have been put on the table for the partners. I'm not my memory, I do not remember if it was put on the table for the public. I don't think so. But the public understood that the partners were sitting together going through this information. So they would have been operating based on full information. That sharing of information and the feeling that information is being honestly shared is critical for the survival, well, for the efficacy of social dialogue and for the survival of the partnership. Because the moment any of the partners believe that either they're being blindsided or that all the information is not being shared or it is being spun, then the dialogue is not really, the partnership is not going to work. Because at that point, it ceases to be a partnership.
Yes.
You know, people begin to feel used. You're bringing me to the table, you're giving me a bit of information, asking me to make a decision, and then 2 weeks down the road, I find out that this is not what it was. And so, you know, if that were ever to happen, then that destroys the partnership. The fact that the partnership still exists is an indication that that has not happened.
Okay.
And in this situation that we're in now, the BERT Monitoring Committee, which is part of the IMF program, the Extended Fund Facility program, that BERT Monitoring Committee is a committee co-chaired by workers, by unions and business. And all the information, so government does not give them information. Government as in the cabinet or the prime minister or ministers. They get their information from central bank governor, from director of finance, economic affairs. They get the information from the independent functionaries. And they make their assessment. As a matter of fact, I'm the minister responsible for social partnership relations. I get the report maybe just minutes before it goes public. Sometimes while the press conference is going on, I get the report. So it is not a matter of being able to screen the report and say, well, don't say that, say this. It is not in our hands at all. So we've been very clear and transparent with all the information. And what we've also done is to allow decisions to be made at the partnership. Even though government at the end of the day has to make the ultimate decision, many or almost all of the decisions that we've made have been really decisions that have been made at the level of the social partnership. So when we were working through, this is in 2018, which departments of government we should downsize, close down, re-engineer. The first survey that we did was in a social partnership meeting. And Prime Minister just went around the room. We spoke about what the department does, just in case somebody didn't know what the department was responsible for. And she asked, is this absolutely essential? Is it highly desirable? Is it optional? And with the understanding that optional meant that if worse came to worse, we could maybe get rid of that department or amalgamate it or refashion. And we knew that the absolutely essential meant that we had to continue with those. Our ultimate decision reflected exactly what came out of social partnership. Exactly what came out of social partnership. So we were at one as to what needed to be done. And this was in the public sector.
Yes.
Coming out of that and the job losses that came out, I mean, just about 1,000 job losses, but when I said just about, any job loss is a difficult situation, a difficult matter, but much less than would have been the case if we hadn't done it collectively and other prescriptions put on the table.
One quick one, this is almost a yes or no. At any point of the social partnership of, in the last 29 years, has the party in opposition sat at the table? Is there a place in the social partnership for the party in opposition?
Not in the official social partnership meetings.
No. Okay.
However, what we've done in the meeting we had on Monday,
Mm-hmm.
the leader of the opposition party, she doesn't sit in parliament because they don't have any seats, but the leader of that party attended the meeting, was invited and attended the meeting.
Okay.
The meeting of the social partnership that we held before, when we were taking the decisions about closing down
Mm-hmm.
and responding to the pandemic, the leader of the opposition in parliament attended that one, and the same leader of the largest opposition party, even outside of government, also attended that meeting. So officially at our regular meetings, the opposition has never been involved.
Yes.
But what this government has done is that for when really major decisions related to the COVID, either at the beginning or now at the end, when those discussions are taking place, we brought the opposition parties to the table, invited them to come to the table to put their perspectives on the table.
I have a question from the the Caribbean regional representative from Public Services International, your countrywoman, Sandra Messiah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And Sandra asked, is inquiring whether social dialogue can exist even if there is no social partnership. And I think this is less a yes or no. And what are the benefits of having an institutional written arrangement for for social dialogue as opposed to a more informal arrangement?
Now, I would distinguish between informal and ad hoc.
Okay.
We have no legislation setting up a social partnership structure. So, to some degree, our social partnership is informal.
Mm-hmm.
It is not set up in legislation anywhere. But that does not mean it is ad hoc. So, it is understood to be an institution that is part of our governance, even though it is not being formally established. We know, for example, that the Prime Minister is the chair of the social partnership. We know that the head of the Private Sector Association is leading on the business side. We know that the head of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations and the head of the BW, because the BW is not part of the Congress, those two heads speak initially for the trade union movement. And that has just come to be understood, even though it is not being formally set up as like a political party is, like a cabinet is, like a trade union is. It doesn't have a legal frame, but it is just understood. Now, out of that, to answer Sister Messiah's question, I believe informally, the informal structure can work if there has been buy-in and commitment by all the partners. So that, like I indicated earlier, during the years when there was that lull, there were members of the partnership who were asking, agitating, we need to sit down, we need to speak, we need to meet, because they understood that there was a structure, even though it was not a formal structure. So we couldn't go to court to say, well, the bylaws say this and you have breached the bylaws. There are no bylaws. There's nothing like that, but it is understood. Now, so that can work if there's full buy-in and commitment by the partners. If it is just ad hoc, and if the partnership functions only when somebody remembers, and then there's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
There is going to be a challenge. The reason why I cannot say that I prefer the informal versus the legal,
Mm-hmm.
but what I would say is that if you can get the commitment a real resolute commitment by the partners, then there would really be no need for the formal. But you may need the formal to create a structure that is more demanding that these meetings happen and that there's a consultation on these areas, like that. So informal can work. Ad hoc is not going to work. Informal will work only if there is that full buy-in by all the partners.
Yes. Okay, I have well, one of the things that strikes me is I would first some mechanics. How often does the social partnership meet?
On average, I would say about once a month.
Yes.
But in the first 12 months, in our first 12 months, I would say we met more frequently than that.
Yes.
But the Prime Minister's schedule is once a month. Now, because of the informal nature, it is not set for any particular date. But we know that it's going to be once a month. So once the Prime Minister's, well, her schedule is a very demanding one. But there's been a time, for example, when we met about 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and she said, no, stop, you have to have a meeting. So we try to meet on average once a month. Once a month. But we have met more frequently when there were greater demands that we meet. So in our first 6 months, I know for sure, we met about maybe 9 times in 6 months. We were meeting pretty frequently. And
you would, as Minister for Social Partner Relationship, you would be essentially the deputy chair of the social partnership?
Yes, deputy chair of the social partnership structure, not necessarily deputy chair of meetings. Because in the meetings, sometimes it depends on what is being discussed. So there have been meetings where if the Prime Minister stepped out, I would carry the meeting. There have been times when if she stepped out, either to take a call, to have another meeting while we continue, where the Attorney General might do that. And there have also been meetings where the minister who acts as deputy prime minister, sorry, not deputy, who acts as prime minister when the prime minister is off island or any otherwise indisposed. Sometimes that minister has also chaired meetings of the partnership. However, we have not had any meetings that the prime minister has not been present for those meetings. And that is another important thing. We believe, she certainly believes, and I believe as minister responsible for the relationship, that it has to be recognized that there is a commitment at the very top of government to the partnership and to the whole, to social dialogue and the understanding of what that dialogue, how important it is. That the recognition of the importance of it has to be seen by the involvement of the person right at the top of government. So
I always said that is a critical success factor. I mean, you can't, and I'm impressed by the fact that it seems as though there is a personal commitment on the part of the Prime Minister, and it's a recognition of how important it is.
Yes.
I just want to welcome, acknowledge the presence of the Suriname Labour College, who's on the webinar with us. I want to go back, Minister, to a question. And to go back to a question that's posed by Mr. Griffith. Mr. Griffith notes that we are a set of small, open economies, and like Barbados, Grenada, and like most countries in the region, Grenada are heavily tourism dependent. Do you see any special challenges with regard to reopening and the risk inherent in reopening the tourism sector, and how confident are you that we will be able to deal with any surges or spikes?
There are risks inherent in reopening. The Prime Minister has actually, this came out of a social partnership meeting. The social partners agreed based on an initial form of words that she put on the table. Our approach is safe people doing safe work in a safe country. And that slogan is our guiding slogan that came out of a social partnership discussion.
Yes.
We recognize that there are risks to reopening. We also recognize that there are risks to not reopening. Significant risks both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we have taken the view that COVID-19 is going to be with us for a while.
Yes.
Because even if there is a vaccine or a therapeutic, it is not going to become widely available for quite some time. If it were discovered today, then to manufacture the 8 billion doses needed to inoculate the world, so it means that COVID-19 is going to be with us for a while. If countries do not get back to some form of economic activity, then our countries, the small open economies that Mr. Griffith speaks to, will implode.
Mm-hmm.
And that implosion will impact first the most vulnerable. Those who have a few dollars that can tie them over for a little bit, I mean, they will eventually fall as well. But
Yes.
those who are unemployed, those who are living paycheck to paycheck, will be initially the first to go under. So we have to weigh the risks and make sure that we take the mitigating steps. What we've done over the past week would be, we've gone through the Ministry of Tourism and the businesses in tourism, the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, as well as the Barbados Workers Union that represents most of the workers in the hotel and the restaurant subsectors of the BHTA, have gone through, along with the Ministry of Health, and have more or less signed off. I don't know that they've officially done it as yet, but more or less agreed to what the protocols will be for the reopening. So matters of PPE, how workers will treat to various situations, those have been gone through, and I think essentially agreed. And we knew that that had to happen. As a matter of fact, coming out of that, because this is the workers' organization in discussion, but we have said, because we met with the tourism sector and the unions about, well, almost the entire of last week.
Yes.
I was at meetings probably almost every other day along with the Minister of Tourism. And what we have agreed, what we know has to happen, is that there has to be a significant education program so that tourism workers who come back to work feel comfortable enough to engage in the work.
Yes.
We know that most of them want to get back to work. They want to go back into an environment that has been made as safe as is possible, and that their health is as protected as can be. So there is a recognition that we have to reopen, and we are taking these steps, again, using social dialogue to make sure that when we reopen, that we are providing safe work for safe people.
I have a question, Minister, from our colleague and my counterpart, Mr. Victor Jones, from the Suriname Labour College. And Victor is asking, how how to deal with a situation when there is a structure in place, but the government doesn't seem to respect the social partners.
That is a difficult one. All I will say, I'm not the Minister of Foreign Affairs, so I have to be quite careful. But all I will say is that for social dialogue to work, government has to be fully invested. Government has to be fully at the table. If not, what will happen is that the other partners together will become a pressure group. Now, the challenge that poses is that if you are a pressure group on the other side of government, then you appear to be political. And when you appear to be political, then there are going to be elements within your group, because there are going to be people within the business community in Barbados who support government and those who support the opposition. Same thing happens in the workers' movement. So if the two join together and are opposed to the government or appear to be opposed to the government, then it must splinter their own efforts. But they become then a pressure group. But all that said, I still believe that well-meaning organizations have to speak up. Have to speak up. Our Prime Minister often says that principles only mean something when it is difficult to stand by them. You know, when the chips are down. So that is when you know what a principle really is. When, in spite of the difficulty, you believe you have to stand up and speak up. And if there's a situation, but the other thing is that I think, and I remember thinking this, I think either on your first or second webinar, there needs to be an identifying of, this may become over as politicking, but I think it has to happen. I mean, it happens in diplomacy. You have to identify maybe those within government who you think are amenable to your cause, and try to get through to government. Because sometimes government, and I know this from being part of a government, sometimes there are challenges that others may not be aware of that are taking your full attention. Everybody knows that COVID-19 is taking our attention because it is taking everybody's attention. It is there. But sometimes there are other matters that are taking your attention, and others outside of those involved may not know. So you may appear to be ignoring because you're so fully focused on something else. And in those situations, it would probably be a good thing. I think Andre has left the meeting, but anyway, I think in those situations, it would be good to identify those in government who may be amenable to your cause and try to get through to the decision makers using those persons. That would really be my advice. But the straight answer is that if government is not fully committed, then you really don't have a partnership, a full social partnership. So that if there's no full partnership, then the full dialogue does not happen. You're muted.
Are there any other questions for Minister? Well, I am happy Senator Humphrey was attempting to join in the last several minutes, but there were some challenges. But this has been a particularly rewarding experience for me to engage deeply with you, Minister, on the experience of Barbados. And there are many lessons for us to learn from your experience. I thank you for being extremely generous with your time, because you've shared with me the type of schedules that you have been that you've been keeping, and I don't think you were breaking any confidences of the cabinet to tell me how many times you and how long some of your meetings are. But
no,
it speaks to your dedication, and I certainly appreciate the leadership that Barbados has shown in the way of social dialogue. I remember when I was a staff member at the International Labour Organization, Barbados was identified as an international good practice for social dialogue and social partnership. So I think this is a very valuable resource that we have in the region, and maybe what we need to do is to learn and see what lessons we can apply. No other country in the region is Barbados. You are very unique. You are a very unique people, and I am sure that speaks to some of the reasons for the success of the initiative. As
But
we,
I would say though that but two things. One is that we've always stood ready to offer our experiences
yes,
if any other country feels that they can be of assistance. What I would also want to say is that in the Caribbean we have to act as family, so that we are not going to be, we meaning Barbados is not, we're not going to be talking down to anybody.
yes,
If you're trying to start your own social dialogue or putting a structure in place, we would simply want to share what we've done, and if anybody can benefit from it, we would be happy. But I also think that we need to, generally speaking, share more together.
yes,
And when you mentioned ILO, it reminded me that at the level of the ILO, the sub-regional office in Trinidad, we have been talking about trying to create a forum where Caribbean ministers of labor can meet periodically. The last time we met, we would have hosted a meeting here in Barbados early last year, and that was before the Centenary Conference. And the Caribbean can make an impact. The Caribbean can make an impact. And I think each of our countries, we have our differences, but there is still a common thread that runs through the Caribbean. All of us want to see our countries succeed. I think Caribbean people all want to be involved in government at a level that is deeper than at election time. And social dialogue helps to facilitate that.
yes,
It helps people to be able to be involved. I mean, it is still limited to some degree because it is business and workers' representatives. So there's still significant pockets not necessarily included in that discussion. But that, even for us in Barbados, is a work in progress. We have only set up the Social Justice Committee last year, 2019.
yes.
I mean, that was 28 years after we started the social partnership. It is still a work in progress. So I don't think any of our countries should feel that they've missed the boat. I grew up hearing that it's never too late to do a good thing. So nobody is too late to start the process of trying to pull together. And the other thing is that somebody used this recently to me. I hadn't heard it before. Some people may consider it, we say, a little bit corny, but the question is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer I heard was one bite at a time. But we used to use the one, I think the Chinese one that said the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step.
Yes.
And we just need to start. The other thing, which I said to some of my colleague ministers of labor in Panama, I think in late 2018, was that the people of the Caribbean are becoming more aware, more engaged, they're more educated, and they're going to be less and less likely to accept being left out of decision making. And so my advice to our government, of which I'm a part, and to the rest of the Caribbean, is that we have to create mechanisms through which people can input. And if it means creating an organization, I'll give an example. At the CARICOM level, a decision was taken to have a social dialogue of sorts at the CARICOM level, at the level of heads. So the Caribbean Congress of Labour is at the table, and there's a private sector agency that's being formed that will also be at the table. I'm not sure obviously they're not heads of governments, but their voices need to be heard. So at the CARICOM level, there is move afoot to deepen and strengthen social dialogue. I think each of our countries should reflect that and take whatever steps are needed, baby steps at first if necessary, but whatever steps are needed to bring employers to the table, bring workers to the table. And if that is the first step, fine. And then thereafter, at some other point, bring other sectors of the society to the table. Now, Cipriani deals with cooperatives, labor and cooperatives.
Mm-hmm.
And you've established, in one of your webinars as well, I heard the link established between labor and the cooperative movement. It took a long time to bring credit unions to the table, but they are now at the table.
Yes.
So I'm sharing that experience to say that sometimes there are things that you overlook, things that you should have done a long time ago, but because you hadn't done it a long time ago doesn't mean that this is not now the time to do it. And again, that is one of our experiences. We left the credit union movement out for too long. Our credit union movement started with our trade unions.
Yes.
So National Union of Public Workers, credit union, the teachers, two teachers unions, two credit unions. And that is really how the credit union movement was built. But we had the unions at the table, but not their credit unions that control significant amounts of the savings of workers and other ordinary people.
Yes.
So anyway, all of that to say, it's never too late to do a good thing. I just want to encourage the rest of the Caribbean to create those structures that will deepen and broaden governance. It does not mean that you give up your right to govern and to lead. From time to time, our Prime Minister says to the social partnership, then sometimes the discussion is not going anywhere. Sometimes it went around in circles. And she says to the partnership, she says, no, ladies and gentlemen, at the end of the day, government will govern. And so you don't give up anything by including others.
Yes.
The process, because at the end of the day, those of us who have been elected to lead in government have to lead. But we will benefit. We have benefited in Barbados, and I believe governments generally will benefit, at least from consulting and hearing the views and listening to the views of other sectors of society, the other partners.
Minister, again, thank you so very much. I want to apologize for Senator Humphrey. Senator Humphrey was engaged as part of the COVID task force in Grenada and was actually in a meeting with Prime Minister Mitchell and attempted to join us late, but was unable to. But I know of Chester's commitment and his hard work. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to organize another forum in which Senator Humphrey will be able to share with us the benefit of his views. Minister, we see you as a part of the Cipriani community, and I thank you very much. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of my colleagues. We'd like you to convey our regards and thanks to the Honourable Prime Minister of Barbados for the sterling leadership, Caribbean leadership. We were very proud to see her at the WHO, on the BBC, on the CNN, representing the Caribbean. So please let her know that if she ever wants to migrate from Barbados, she will be very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. This has been one of our continuing series of addressing issues touching on working people in the aftermath of COVID. And this week, Trinidad and Tobago celebrates Labor Day. On Friday, we are honored to have the president of Howard University, Dr. Wayne Frederick, a Trinidadian, who will be speaking, who will be sharing with us on the role of education in protecting the rights of workers and advancing the cause of workers. So with that, do have a good evening and Godspeed to everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. Happy Labor Day.
Yes, thanks.